The relationship between Canada and the United States has been a real storm in recent years. If you think that it is all just a political game, you are very wrong. This conflict has not only affected the economies of both countries, but also put their future cooperation in doubt. Trump, Musk, and Trudeau are three figures whose decisions and actions have largely determined how events unfold, and the consequences of these decisions could affect the global market as a whole.
We'll tell you why Woz is correct in having that take, because look, as a reminder, Musk is the CEO of multiple companies, not just Tesla, but also he's the CEO of SpaceX and CTO of X. He's not the CEO, but CTO of X. So today, we're gonna focus on Tesla specifically because, well, take a look at this. This chart will show you Tesla's not doing so well. The stock for Tesla has taken a dip, to say the least.
When Donald Trump began imposing tariffs on steel and aluminum, few predicted how quickly and harshly Canada would react, but that was just the beginning. Soaring prices, the threat of ruined trade ties, and diplomatic tensions were all part of the new reality for the North American continent. Canada had no choice but to retaliate. In response to US actions, Trudeau imposes a 25% tariff on electricity exports and launches sweeping economic countermeasures. But the question here is, why is this war escalating to this point, and who is really behind the deepening divisions? Look at Musk, a man who, despite his worldwide popularity and fame, has found himself at the center of this global conflict, playing a key role in maintaining economic ties and technology partnerships. Not so long ago, he was on Trump's side, but his stance is deviating from it more and more every day. Musk is essentially in a situation where he has to choose between supporting his running mate or saving the company from the effects of economic warfare. However, his actions have led many to question how one figure in the tech world can have such a profound impact on global politics.
You giving up your other stuff? I mean, how are you running your other businesses?
With great difficulty. Yeah, I mean...
But there's no turning back, you're saying?
I'm just here trying to make government more efficient.
And of course, Justin Trudeau, who himself has become a symbol of resistance. How was Canada's Prime Minister able to maintain a strategic course, despite pressure from a powerful neighbor? Why did he choose not to enter into covert negotiations, as Mexico did, for example, but opted for a public confrontation? The answers to these questions may give us insight into how important Canada's every move in this conflict has been. Trump, Musk, and Trudeau are three men who are literally playing chess on the world stage. What was the decisive moment in this conflict? And what's in store for us next? Join us to find out how this trade war is changing not only the relationship between the two countries, but the global economy as a whole. In 2018, the US decided to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum, which was the catalyst for a massive trade war engulfing North America. These measures, according to Trump, were supposed to protect American jobs and boost manufacturing in the country. In practice, however, they have created enormous economic hardship, not only for the supplier countries, but also for the US economy itself. In response, Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the US, was forced to take countermeasures. These measures included not only increased tariffs on products, but also harsh economic sanctions affecting not only steel and aluminum, but also broader areas of trade.
30% over the last week. So this is the 6-month performance chart for Tesla stock. And as you can see, it went up like crazy in the weeks after Trump got elected, peaking at almost $500 per share in mid-December. But since then, it's been tumbling and tumbling. And as of writing this, Tesla's stock sits at $225 a share. So that's still pretty pricey per share, but it's not $500 per share. Like, obviously, he's struggling here. So in fact, yesterday was the single worst day for Tesla stock in 5 years. It went down a whole 15%. That also, by the way, reduced Musk's net worth by...
The first steps in response to the imposition of tariffs were the Canadian government's decisions to impose an economic blockade on the United States. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that Canada was imposing a 25% tariff on electricity exports to the US, much to the dismay of Washington. This was a heavy blow for the US, as Canadian electricity accounted for a significant part of energy consumption in the north of the country, and higher prices for this resource could lead to higher costs and inflation in a number of regions. In addition, Canada began increasing tariffs on a wide range of goods, including meat, agricultural products, and automobiles, which had a serious impact on the economies of both countries. The magnitude of this war only intensified, and soon neither side could escape the consequences. What was most acute, however, was not only the imposition of tariffs, but the fact that relations between Canada and the United States began to deteriorate in the area of diplomacy. Canada's response was not limited to economic measures, it became an open display of political resistance. Canada, which had traditionally sought friendly relations with America, began to actively voice its position in international forums. Justin Trudeau, in his speeches and interviews, repeatedly emphasized that the Canadian economy would not tolerate threats from a major power, and that the entire country should be ready for a tough response. The situation has reached the point where Canada has begun to build new diplomatic bridges with other countries in order to reduce its dependence on the United States.
The car that I drive is the Model S Plaid.
Which is that one?
That red one in the middle.
I like that, yeah.
It's 0 to 60 miles an hour in 2 seconds. It's faster than a Ferrari.
It's pretty, I don't know if my people can handle it. Jeff, they're going to be using it more. I'm not allowed to use it. This is beautiful. Whoa. Should I get in?
Get in!
Okay.
Have you ever sat
Let me get in
steering wheel on one of these? Of a Tesla?
You want my notes?
Yeah.
They gave me notes. I said, I'm not Biden. I don't need notes. This is a different panel than I've had. Everything's computer. That's beautiful. Wow.
At this time, amidst the deteriorating relations, tensions began to arise in the US. Former President Donald Trump, despite his passion for nationalism and America first, did not expect Canada to be able to oppose his policies so sharply and effectively. The White House began discussing not only economic risks but also political risks. One of Trump's advisors floated the idea that Canada should literally be forced back into the trade agreement within a tighter framework. The plan included trying to persuade Canada to join the US. Despite support for the idea within the ranks of the administration, Trump himself has publicly stated that he would respect Canada's sovereignty. However, these words contradicted his actions, and the confrontation between the two countries only grew.
The Tesla stock price and all of that stuff, like, folks gotta understand the nature of that stock price has always been overinflated. Like, how do you become the richest man in the world by just selling cars? You know, like, Toyota's not the richest company in the world. They sell way more Teslas than Elon does. That's because Elon's stock price is pegged to just people's belief that he's gonna turn Tesla into more than just a car company, right? Like, oh, it's gonna be self-driving, it's gonna be this, it's gonna be self-taxiing. You're gonna be able to rent your Teslas. Like, he's always selling some grander vision that usually doesn't come to fruition, and that's what the stock price is indicative of. That's not to say he didn't turn Tesla into a profitable company. It is, but like, the profits made off of the cars that this guy sells.
Canada, for its part, perceived the threats with restraint but determination. In response to all new economic demands from the US, Trudeau said that Canada did not intend to submit to political pressure. He said that despite the complexity of the situation, the Canadian economy was unlikely to suffer in the long term because the country had strong trade and political ties with other countries. In response to these threats, a sense of national unity literally swept Canada, and even those who had previously maintained close relations with the US began to express support for Trudeau's tough policies. This was a turning point that led to a significant deterioration in relations between the two neighbors. Meanwhile, Musk, who had been a strong supporter of Trump, found himself at the center of this conflict, playing a key role in the technological cooperation between the two countries. His companies, such as Tesla, SpaceX, and others, were bringing their designs to Canada, where infrastructure for renewable energy was being actively developed. However, as tensions grew, Musk began to express doubts about whether his choice in supporting the US president was the right one. He publicly stated that he did not support the imposition of new tariffs because they would hurt many innovative companies including his own. Over time, Musk began moving some manufacturing facilities to Canada, where it was more profitable to do business in the face of growing pressure in the US. Despite this move, Musk continued to remain in a difficult situation, trying to please both the US and Canadian markets. Ultimately, his actions had a significant impact on the economies of both countries as his companies began to reduce their shipments to the US and increase their investments in the Canadian economy, boosting the growth of the Canadian high-tech sector. Thus, the trade war between the US and Canada, which began with the imposition of tariffs on steel and aluminum, not only resulted in economic consequences for both countries, but also deepened the political and diplomatic standoff. Canada's response, including economic sanctions and diplomatic confrontation, was the starting point for a new phase in relations between the two countries. The Canadian government and Trudeau, despite US pressure, were able to preserve the country's sovereignty and strengthen the economy by finding new allies around the world. The situation was exacerbated by the intervention of figures like Musk, who found himself at the epicenter of economic change, trying to balance the interests of the two countries, each deciding in their own way how to behave in the face of a global trade war.
A burning of a store. So you could probably stop people from protesting, but you're not going to stop people from vandalizing by, some excessive show of force. And, I think folks need to understand that
when Canada decided not to remain silent and publicly confront US economic aggression, the situation began to take on new dimensions. Justin Trudeau, under pressure, became a symbol of resistance, demonstrating his determination not only to protect the country's economic interests, but also to strengthen its political independence. This was the moment when the Canadian Prime Minister realized that the threat of US economic pressure should not be limited to changes in tariffs, but should become part of a broader context, a context that was not only about economics, but also about sovereignty. Trudeau actively raised the importance of protecting national interests, pointing out that economic dependence on the US should not dictate the rules of the game. Against this background, Canada's countermeasures became increasingly aggressive. The country began to discuss a strategy in which not only economic but also political factors played an important role. Some analysts argued that Trudeau realized that if he did not defend independence now, in the future the country risked becoming nothing more than a satellite of the United States, devoid of its own economic policy. In response to the US tariffs, Canada was supported not only by large companies, but also by a significant part of the population. Rallies and public statements supporting the government were organized in different parts of the country. It became evident that Canada was in a struggle not only for economic prosperity, but also for the preservation of its identity. In the diplomatic arena, Canada began to offer alternatives to cooperating with the United States by forging closer ties with Europe and Asian countries. It was at this point, when the situation was becoming increasingly tense amid economic sanctions, that Canada needed an ally that could play on the side of the technology and innovation economy. And that ally appeared in the person of Elon Musk. At first glance, Musk, being an American entrepreneur and having publicly supported Trump more than once, did not seem to be the most obvious ally for Trudeau. However, Musk, as a global entrepreneur, realized that the current political situation in the US and the imposed tariffs posed huge risks to his business. Trump's strategy could have stalled the development of his companies, especially in key areas such as electric vehicles and renewable energy, where he himself was a market leader, especially since it was advantageous for his companies to expand production in Canada. The country offered attractive conditions for the development of such innovative industries. So, secretly from the public, Musk started negotiating with the Canadian government. He proposed significant investments in the Canadian market, envisioning the creation of new jobs, development of infrastructure for green energy and support for innovative technologies. Musk saw this as a chance not only for his business, but also to strategically strengthen ties between Canada and the US, where his companies could act as a kind of bridge. However, all of this was hidden from the eyes of the general public. Many did not know that Musk's move was largely motivated by a desire to find strategic cooperation with Canada, and not just within his business interests. Musk realized that it was in Canada where he could keep his business sustainable and avoid possible sanctions and tax risks associated with Trump and his political line. Musk was not the only one trying to take this situation to the next level. The Canadian government also realized that there were too many risks resting on their shoulders. With the US continuing to build up economic pressure, Canada needed to find a way out of an impasse where a trade war with the US risked escalating into long-term political isolation. In this context, Musk's role became even more important. He offered Canada not just investment, but a comprehensive strategy for modernizing its energy infrastructure that could give the country not only economic independence, but also a significant strategic advantage in terms of environmental sustainability and technological independence. In response to these proposals, Canadian authorities began to revise their energy sector plans, promoting ideas that could make the country a leader in renewable energy. This was a watershed moment. In the US, on the contrary, they gradually began to realize that if the conflict with Canada continued, Trump could not only increase the differences between the countries, but also create a long-term threat to their own business, especially in the field of high technology. It's no secret that Musk and his companies have played an important role in supporting US economic growth, and losing this ally would be a serious blow to Trump's image. Musk, meanwhile, continued to gently but surely maneuver between the two fires, the US and Canada. In the end, this was a factor that played an important role in normalizing relations between the two countries, although not in the way many expected. Nevertheless, the question of how relations between Canada and the US would continue to develop remained open. Canadian diplomats began looking for new alliances in the international arena, gradually building channels that could help the country withstand not only economic but also political pressure from its neighbors. Musk, on the other hand, continued to develop his projects, supporting Canada not only in business circles but also in the broader context of geopolitics. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, with his political experience and diplomatic skills, was able to successfully maintain the country's political independence and strengthen its position on the world stage. From that point on, it became clear that it was not only economic measures and tariffs that determined the fate of the bilateral relationship, but also deeper strategic decisions such as alliances in technology and energy. Trudeau and Musk were instrumental in this process, finding ways to support the country in the face of growing pressures and global change. When the trade war between the US and Canada entered the active phase, the consequences for both countries' economies became apparent. First and foremost, the economic damage to the US was significant. The imposition of tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum threatened not only American industry, but also its global reputation as an economic giant. American cities that had traditionally depended on Canadian supplies began to close factories, and the number of unemployed workers skyrocketed. One of the main problems for the US was the new cost of replacing Canadian goods, which increased the cost of production and also drove up the price of building materials and auto parts critical to the US economy. One of the most painful blows to the US economy was the rising price of automobiles. With Canadian companies supplying much of the US with auto parts, the tariffs imposed by Trump led to shortages of parts, affecting major auto companies such as General Motors and Ford. Falling factory productivity and individual plant closures have hit these companies, affecting millions of jobs. The US real estate market also felt the effects of the war, as Canadian supplies became an important part of the construction industry. Housing prices began to rise and construction companies faced material shortages. As a result, rising inflation and falling living standards became a reality for many Americans. This also caused tension in the stock markets. Investors began to lose confidence in the US economy, which led to significant drops in the stock markets. In response, the US Federal Reserve was forced to lower interest rates in order to somehow support the economy. However, this could not stop the growing economic instability, and serious discussions began within the country about the consequences of the imposed tariffs. Economists began to point out that Trump's actions only made the situation worse, and the country could face a deep recession if the war continued. For Canada, on the other hand, the economic consequences have become just as severe. However, Canada, despite the pressure, has managed to not only withstand the blow but also reap certain benefits. The Canadian government quickly adapted to the new conditions, introducing countermeasures that helped offset the losses from the shrinking US market. First, Trudeau personally initiated several economic programs aimed at stimulating local production. The second important step was to increase cooperation with other countries. Already in the early months of the trade war, Canada entered into new trade agreements with the European Union and Asian countries. These new alliances allowed Canada to significantly diversify its export markets, which reduced its dependence on the United States and stabilized its economy. However, one of the key steps that Canada has taken has been to attract foreign investment, especially in technology and renewable energy. Elon Musk has played an important role in this process. His companies, such as Tesla and SpaceX, were involved in projects that required massive investment in Canada. Musk realized that the strained relations between the two countries could affect his business in the US, so he decided to move some of his manufacturing facilities to Canada. This decision not only helped him avoid the risks associated with US tariff, but also allowed Canada to seize the opportunity to modernize its infrastructure. Musk has invested in new electric car and solar panel plants that have helped Canada reduce its dependence on hydrocarbons and become an important player in the clean tech market. Canadian authorities have also started to actively develop programs to support local manufacturers, offering tax breaks and subsidies to companies that are willing to invest in modernizing their production. This has led to a number of large Canadian companies, such as Bombardier and Magna International, increasing their capacity and developing new markets. In this way, Canada was not only able to compensate for the loss of trade with the United States, but also to become more economically self-sufficient. One of Canada's most striking and unexpected moves was its decision to refuse to fulfill US demands for American membership. This was not only a matter of political sovereignty, but also a strategic choice that it was felt could jeopardize the country's future. In response to the US proposals, Canada adopted a tough course of action, raising tariffs on American goods, including products from the automobile and agricultural industries. In addition, Canada also announced that it would stop importing goods that were made in the US, including various consumer goods, including electronics and automobiles. This decision immediately drew the world's attention, signaling that Canada is not willing to concede anything, even if it leads to further escalation of the conflict. In any case, these Canadian actions were an important step towards a new era in international politics. The Canadian government, despite pressure and threats, was able to demonstrate its independence and ability to act in the best interests of its country. And while US actions became more severe at this point, even within the US elite, voices began to be heard, demanding a rethinking of strategy, including at the level of deciding the future of relations with Canada. So Canada's response to US demands was a landmark moment in the history of international relations. Trudeau and his team showed that the country can not only protect its economic interests, but also defend its sovereignty in the face of global change. Moreover, this conflict became a kind of test for Canada, which was able to withstand the economic blockade and demonstrate to the world that its future depends on its own decisions and strategic alliances, not on the political decisions of other countries.